A carefully planned scheme. 3 bottles of gasoline, perfectly disguised in appearance. A cold, deliberate action. Flames erupt suddenly in the aircraft cabin. Within minutes, everyone is engulfed in toxic smoke. The aircraft loses control. The final cries for help echo into the vast sky. Why did he do it? What drove a father, a businessman, to take 112 lives into tragedy? Let's step into the story of China Northern Airlines Flight 6136. On the evening of May 7, 2002, at exactly 7 p.m., Beijing Capital International Airport, one of the busiest and most important aviation hubs in the world, bustled with activity. Every day, it handles hundreds of domestic and international flights carrying massive passenger loads. In Terminal 1, technicians were working under pressure to complete preparations for a scheduled commercial flight of China Northern Airlines. Flight number: China Northern Airlines 6136. Planned route: Beijing to Dalian Shoshuizi International Airport, covering a distance of about 520 kilometers heading northeast. Under normal conditions, the flight time was about 1 hour and 20 minutes. The aircraft operating this flight was a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, registration B2138. This was a twin-engine, narrow-body jet made in the United States, delivered in 1991. By the time of the accident, it had accumulated 27,000 flight hours. This particular MD-82 had previously been involved in 2 serious safety incidents, both in 1993, and coincidentally, both times it was forced to divert to Taipei instead of its intended destination, Fuzhou. The first incident occurred on November 12, 1993, during a flight from Changchun to Fuzhou. 2 Chinese passengers, armed with scalpels and a fake bomb, hijacked the plane and demanded to be flown to Taipei. The aircraft eventually landed safely in Taipei, and all 82 people on board survived. Less than a month later, on December 8, 1993, the same MD-82 was targeted again. On a flight from Qingdao to Fuzhou, a Chinese passenger attacked and injured a flight attendant, claiming to have a bomb. Once again, the aircraft was forced to divert and landed safely in Taipei. All 137 people on board were unharmed, and no bombs were ever found in either of the 2 earlier incidents. Despite those ordeals, the aircraft still maintained a good maintenance record. Before this flight, it had undergone its routine technical inspection, was fully refueled, and met all safety requirements for a standard commercial flight. The crew for this flight consisted of 9 members. In addition to them, Flight 6136 carried 103 passengers, most of whom were Chinese citizens. At exactly 8 p.m., the McDonnell Douglas MD-82 had completed all necessary pre-departure preparations, including thorough technical checks and full refueling, and was ready for its mission. Boarding began, and the atmosphere in the cabin was relatively calm. Among the passengers who had already taken their seats was a man sitting alone on the left side of the aircraft near the tail, by the window, in fact, in the very last row. The 3 rows surrounding him were completely empty, making him the only passenger in that section. This seat was not usually popular because it was close to the engines, where noise and vibration were noticeably stronger. In addition, he was clutching a backpack tightly on his lap, something uncommon on a commercial flight, especially since carry-on bags are usually required to be placed in the overhead bins or under the seat in front. This unusual behavior caught the attention of the flight attendants, but since no obvious irregularities were found at the time, they soon continued with their duties. The flight preparations went smoothly. China Northern Airlines Flight 6136 left the gate as scheduled and taxied to runway 36R. The pilots requested takeoff clearance from the control tower. The tower responded with the wind direction 040, wind speed 6 knots, and granted takeoff clearance. At 20:37, the McDonnell Douglas MD-82 began accelerating down the runway. In less than 50 seconds, the nose wheel lifted off the ground. Flight 6136 had officially begun its journey to Dalian Zhaoshuzi International Airport.
Local time 21:15, about 40 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft was cruising smoothly at 32,000 feet, preparing to enter Dalian airspace. According to the plan, it would land at 21:40. By now, the pilots had completed most of the approach preparations, awaiting only the final clearance from air traffic control to begin the descent. Inside the cabin, everything was quiet. Many passengers had closed their eyes for a brief rest before landing, while the flight attendants, as per procedure, remained alert. Everything appeared normal, with no sign of trouble. But no one knew that danger was lurking just a few rows away. At 21:18, the man sitting alone at the back made his move when no one was watching. From the backpack he'd been holding tightly on his lap, he took out a plastic bottle filled with gasoline, disguised to look like an ordinary drink bottle. Inside that same backpack, 2 more identical bottles of gasoline were hidden. While the plane, carrying over 100 passengers, was flying high above the ground, he unhesitatingly twisted open the cap and began pouring gasoline onto the floor at the rear of the cabin. He then took a box of matches from his backpack. In an instant, flames shot up and quickly spread to nearby items. Worse still, this MD-82 was not equipped with a smoke detection system, so the cockpit crew had no idea that a severe fire was breaking out in the rear of the cabin. Thick smoke rapidly filled the cabin, jolting sleeping passengers awake and triggering panic. Many scrambled toward the front of the plane to escape the fumes. Flight attendants tried to approach the source of the fire, but the smoke was too dense for them to get close enough to put it out. Some passengers began using oxygen masks, but the situation continued to deteriorate. By this time, the cockpit finally noticed abnormal cabin pressure readings and, from system alerts, realized there was a major problem in the passenger area. The captain immediately contacted Dalian Air Traffic Control to request an emergency landing. Ground controllers quickly approved and guided the aircraft to begin descending toward Dalian Bay, preparing for an approach to the runway. However, by this time, the fire was completely out of control. The blaze had not only spread through the cabin area, but was also smoldering beneath the cabin floor, creeping into critical sections of the aircraft. Beneath the MD-82's cabin floor lay a dense network of electrical wiring and the sole control linkages for operating the plane, core systems essential for maintaining flight stability and directional control. In addition, many fuel lines also ran through this area. Since the aircraft's engines were mounted at the rear of the fuselage, if the flames reached those fuel lines, the consequences would be unimaginable. Back in the cockpit of Flight 6136, once the crew received clearance to descend, the autopilot system suddenly disengaged. The captain, realizing the severity of the crisis, immediately switched to manual control, attempting to bring the aircraft down in the shortest possible time. However, during the turn toward the runway, a piercing alarm blared in the cockpit, warning that the aircraft's bank angle had exceeded safe limits and that there was a risk of losing control. The crew quickly discovered that the tailplane control system was almost completely inoperative, making it extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible, to maintain balance, adjust heading, or control altitude. The fire had already destroyed the critical control mechanisms in the tail, crippling a system that was absolutely vital during the landing phase. Meanwhile, various warning lights on the cockpit control panel were flashing non-stop. The systems indicated multiple severe failures involving hydraulics, fuel, and electrical power. These 3 critical systems are the foundation for keeping the aircraft operational, and now every layer of safety was collapsing one after another. Time was rapidly running out for the crew. The pilots fought desperately with the control yoke, trying to keep the aircraft stable, but in the rear cabin, the situation was already completely out of control. Many passengers were screaming for help. Some had lost consciousness from inhaling the thick smoke, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of burning plastic. The cabin temperature was rising quickly, making breathing increasingly difficult. Within seconds, the tailplane control system completely failed, meaning the aircraft could no longer maintain balance or steer accurately. Immediately after that, the main flight control computer went dead, plunging the entire flight into a state of total loss of control. 2124. China Northern Airlines Flight 6136 completely vanished from the radar screen. All contact with air traffic control was lost. The MD-82 entered a 190-degree bank and plunged nose down at a 30-degree angle into the sea at high speed. The impact force was enormous, leaving no chance of survival. All 112 people on board perished. The crash site was less than 10 minutes flying time from Dalian Airport's landing point. A journey that should have ended safely had instead reached its tragic conclusion. After the accident, the government immediately launched a large-scale investigation and set up a special inquiry committee. The team included representatives from Chinese authorities and experts from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, to jointly analyze the causes. Initial hypothesis. Early speculation centered on an in-flight fire causing the crew to lose control of the aircraft. This was based on the emergency calls made by the cockpit crew, eyewitness accounts from the ground claiming they saw the aircraft circle several times before suddenly nosediving into the sea, physical evidence from the crash site, such as a cabin service cart burned down to its metal frame, reinforcing suspicion of a cabin fire, preliminary reports suggesting that an electrical short circuit in the rear section might have triggered a sudden and intense blaze. Official conclusion. However, Xinhua later released the official investigation finding, which overturned the accident theory. The tragedy was not an accident, but a deliberate act of sabotage. This meant the fire was intentionally set, transforming what was first thought to be a mechanical or electrical failure into a criminal case involving mass murder. A passenger named Zhang Pilin deliberately carried gasoline on board and set it on fire, causing the MD-82 aircraft to completely lose control and crash into the sea. Zhang Pilin was a middle-aged businessman with a family and children and ran his own company. But the investigation revealed that beneath this stable and happy facade was a completely different reality. He was deeply in debt. In the days before Flight 6136 took off, Zhang began showing unusual behavior, indicating a carefully prepared plan to take an extreme course of action. He purchased multiple air insurance policies in succession, naming his family as the beneficiaries. Even more shockingly, he carried 3 plastic bottles filled with gasoline, disguised as bottled drinking water, to evade airport security checks. After boarding, Zhang deliberately chose to sit in the very last row of the cabin, near the engines. That area not only had few passengers, but was also close to multiple critical technical control systems of the aircraft. Crash site inspection results showed clear burn marks near Zhang Pilin's seat. The forensic report further confirmed that the majority of passengers died from carbon monoxide poisoning, a highly toxic gas produced during the fire. Since this was a deliberate arson incident, all insurance companies ultimately refused to pay out any claims. The crash of China Northern Airlines Flight 6136 became one of the deadliest accidents in modern Chinese aviation history, and one of the rare cases where a passenger's intentional sabotage caused an air disaster.